me out here, right? You've talked about your experience and your being. And it's really good that you get to live your experience and I get to live my experience. But what if your experience is that you're homosexual, right? Well, what if that's your experience and you live in an environment which either because it's a feature or because it's a bug, it could be a bug or a feature that doesn't belong in this society. What if it is that you can't actually be yourself? You can't live your experienced existence the way in which you've actually evolved to be, you know?
Has anything more divided Christians than the issue of homosexuality? But what are we talking about when we say lived experience? And what does Jonathan mean when he pushes back on this and says that the Bible denies everyone's lived experiences? This actually isn't as hard a topic as it sounds. We just have to understand that we humans are complex creatures, and we're not going to totally unravel all the mysteries of human attraction in the next few minutes. But we can still get past slogans like lived experience, and at least get an idea for what we're really talking about. And the way to do this is just to briefly compare a couple different time periods, starting with the classical age and compare our current situation to the Greek model of same-sex relationships. With one quick piece of context. You see, this is the moment where I have to explain what I mean when I keep saying that the ancient world is fundamentally different from the modern world. These days, almost no one knows what the ancient world looked like, because they've never seen it. Take, for instance, the movie Gladiator. It's loosely based on a true story. The Emperor Commodus. He really did have a thing for gladiator contests, and he really did fancy himself a gladiator, competing in duels against opponents who knew that if they actually hurt the emperor, they would die a very long, slow death, so Commodus won every fight. That part was true, but Ridley Scott had to leave a lot out. Not because it wasn't interesting. No, it was interesting. He just didn't think that the audience would find it believable. For instance, Commodus thought that he was the Greek demigod Hercules. No, he wasn't playing dress-up. He really thought he was the guy, which is why he's often pictured wearing a lion skin and carrying a club, because that's the way he walked around. He wanted everyone else to see him that way as well, so he took a bunch of invalids into the Colosseum, tied them together. Some versions say he even had them buried in the dirt, some up to their waists, some up to their necks, and then he bashed their heads in with his club. Because he was doing a kind of live-action role play of the story where Hercules defeated the Titans as they rose up out of the earth. But what about Claudius back in the day on PBS? PBS wouldn't mislead their audience, would they? Yes, they would. They had to. Otherwise, no one would have sympathized with the main character and they wouldn't have had such a compelling story. No. They had to leave things out, like Claudius's absolute love for watching people die. He didn't just like watching gladiators, no, he staged large-scale battles. You see, they used to flood the Flavian amphitheater to stage mock sea battles. Not good enough for Claudius. He staged the largest ever held on a lake. 100 ships, 19,000 men. Just like a modern military reenactment, except in the Roman case, the actors really had to kill each other. There's no record of the final death toll, but it was almost certainly in the thousands. Go back just 100 years, and we either change things for dramatic effect or just because we don't realize that that's not how it was. Motivations, ways of speaking, relational dynamics. To see them as they really were, the further back you go, the stranger they seem. And go back prior to Christianization, and it just feels like a different planet. And that brings us to ancient Greece. These days, we've rebranded it as a modern, enlightened society full of humanitarians living in free democratic cities. But that's a joke. Take Plato, for example. You know, the philosopher who wrote The Republic. Well, he had some harsh criticism for the women of Athens. Disgraceful, he called their conduct. What do? They stood in their doorways. They allowed themselves to be seen. And in Greek society, women weren't supposed to be out in public unless accompanied by a husband or a father. You'd think he could have made an exception in this case. I mean, there had just been a battle, and these women were awaiting word on whether or not their loved ones had survived. But no exceptions. The fact is that Greek society functioned very much like a prison yard. And the reason this would be so is very simple. Pagan beliefs led to a utilitarian way of looking at the world. What can you do for me? Everyone acts in their own self-interest. Now, the best thing for society would have been to maintain an even number of men and women. Cuts down on jealousies, works best for raising up the next generation. You don't literally depopulate yourselves the way Greece did by the 1st century AD. But in a culture where everyone is looking out for themselves, They don't care about society. And in ancient labor-intensive economies, where men could almost always generate more wealth than women, boys were seen as more valuable than girls. For Greek families, their goal was usually one daughter, one, as a trading tool. You could hope to marry her into a good family as a means of social climbing. But no more than just one. One study found that only 4% of Athenian families had more than one daughter, 2, 3, 4 sons, but never more than one daughter. Have a second baby girl, and our enlightened Greeks almost always killed them. Of course, this created an imbalance between the numbers of men and women. Too many guys, not enough girls. And over the centuries, their culture met this imbalance with a few strange features. One, the attitude we've already talked about, keeping Greek women indoors, effectively excluding them from much of society. Locked up for their own protection from Greek men who couldn't find a wife. The second was a predictably high number of slaves forced into prostitution. And the third was the basic cultural acceptance of same-sex relationships among men. Now, at this point we need to stop and think about what Stephen was saying. There's two basic notions as to why homosexuality exists. The first of these is that it's genetic, so the product of purely biological processes in a purely material world. And the second, which is based on the Romantic assumption that we all have a soulmate in this world, well, sometimes that soulmate just happens to be the same sex as you are. In our video clip, Stephen called it a bug, which puts us in the purely physical realm. He did a video a while back where he actually asserted both ideas, that it evolved and that it satisfied transcendental romantic needs. It can't be both. In the type of material world that Stephen is constantly asserting, the transcendental is just an illusion generated by chemical processes inside of the body. But in our debate, he only says bug or glitch. So that's the argument I'll look at. All right. Glitch of what? Here's where evolution and the Bible are actually on the same page. Glitch of what? Glitch of the process of making babies. For evolution, the best adapted will normally pass on their genes. In the Bible, people are being fruitful and multiplying. Lots of overlap between these two ideas, all boiling down to the fact that in the game of attraction, men and women tend to instinctively seek out partners that appear the most able among us to reproduce. For men, this means a brain that focuses on external factors that connect to the ability to give birth. So a visual focus on things like facial symmetry, unblemished skin, breast size, and an hourglass hip-to-waist ratio. But that's just part of it. The high male libido creates a pressure to fertilize one or even many partners. And on top of this, there's a psychological pressure towards what we're calling respect here. It's just a sense of appreciation. I really want this person to be grateful for what I do for them. And we can see how that would help gear men towards involving themselves in the process of child rearing. There's also a heightened stimulation around forbidden fruit, so this is our thrill of the chase. That not only primes men to approach a partner, but would also mean that he would continue to approach even after the female gives birth, and even while her libido drops, as her psychology has her focusing on child rearing. But that just brings back a kind of thrill of the chase for him, making continued intimacy rewarding and making it more likely that they'll have more than just one child. Overall, with these human instincts, we can see a process that makes children likely, and so anything that works against that process could, accurate, be described as a bug or a glitch. There's just one problem. Our Greek model doesn't look like a glitch, or even a culture of glitches. It looks like a workaround. You see, it wasn't just same-sex relations in Greek. No, it tended towards a very specific kind of same-sex relation. Adult males, young boys. And at issue here is the fact that this kind of relationship looks very much like a next best thing substitution in a culture where the only heterosexual venue for a lot of men was prostitutes or slaves, which might take care of the libido problem, but without free unpaid consent would do nothing to satisfy the need for respect, that need to be appreciated. Here, in ancient Greece, we have a society that functions like a prison. And just like in a prison, anyone who looks less manly, more feminine, is going to draw attention. For the Greeks, it was young, early pubescent, or teen boys who could actually get something out of the relationship in terms of status and mentoring. So, not a glitch, not there, just a stopgap in a society that killed so many of its girl children. Now, flash forward to the modern day. We've just gone through a period in the latter half of the 20th century where homosexuality has gained widespread acceptance and certainly isn't viewed as a glitch. In fact, you could argue that it's now viewed as something just as healthy, just as normal as heterosexuality. And in 2021, they both certainly have at least one thing in common. They're both vanishing. There's not just one factor here, but there is one that overshadows everything else. Even more than the gender imbalances in ancient Greece, that factor is the prevalence, the nearly universal prevalence, of hardcore pornography in the lives of children, particularly young boys, visual as they are by nature. What effect is this flood of sexual stimulation having on their development? We don't know. This is all too new. If it works like most other things in the brain, then constant immersion in the brain chemicals associated with sex, dopamine and the like, is going to create a tolerance. Their brains will become less responsive to sexual stimulation, causing them to seek out ever more novel permutations of stimulation until the tolerance grows even more and they get bored of those and then move on and on and on. The most obvious direct result of this is that increasingly people will no longer describe themselves as heterosexual or homosexual, but as pansexual or non-binary, or any of the other term that represents someone who can no longer find sexual fulfillment in a single partner. Marriage rates are plummeting, because of course they are. And I don't have anything but anecdotes to support this, but honestly, doesn't it seem like relationships are just becoming not just mercenary, as in it for themselves, heck, Greece was like that, but adversarial? It just seems like we all hate each other now. And I know this sounds forced coming from a site based on end times prophecies and the end of the world, but I promise you, the United States cannot continue like this. Our country is based on a set of assumptions. What I'm owed versus what I owe my community. So rights versus responsibilities. Pull out the Jenga block of even the possibility of a stable, intimate relationship, and I promise you, most people will become, as the sign says here, ungovernable. Won't that be a lark? So, what can we pull from all this? First is that we can throw out a purely material explanation of human sexuality. If such a thing exists, we're not seeing any good signs of it. The reasoning behind this stuff is constantly pulling us out of biology and pressing us towards psychology. Not that biological variations aren't involved, of course they are, but they won't give you your ultimate answers. Our homosexual movement of the recent past was always looking for a purely biological explanation. This guy, Dean Hamer, claimed to have found it. Got a lot of press. Most of that press ignored the fact that the 5% difference he claimed to have found was within the overall margin of error, and other research teams couldn't even find that 5%. No, lots of animals have an obvious, purely biological explanation for their attraction. Colors, behaviors, scents. Companies have spent a fortune trying to find something like that for humans. No luck. Sorry, Axe body spray. No, what we see with humans tends to force us into the realm of psychology, taking human consciousness into account. So for our recent homosexual movement, we may never have found a gay gene, but the link between same-sex preference and describing their relationship with their fathers as distant or even combative was hard to ignore. And all that leaves in this debate is lived experience, a term which used to just be a flowery way to say experience. And why would the Hebrew Scriptures deny that? Because that's not the way it's being used these days. This is the humanist world, where we take the attributes of an all-powerful God and we start imagining that we can do those things. So we experience the world subjectively through our 5 senses. Add on a little consciousness review and interpretation of those things, and voila, I know what it is to be me in my body. In the Hebrew Scriptures view, that's the extent of my lived experience. These days, saying lived experience means that you just know, somehow, things objectively, not subjectively, as in through the subjective experience of my own sensations, but objectively, over and above those sensations. It's getting thrown around all over the place these days as a pushback against direct evidence, as in, you keep saying I have a better chance of being crushed by a vending machine than I do of being shot while unarmed by police, but that denies my lived experience, that I really am an oppressed member of an underclass struggling against a white authoritarian regime that wants to kill me. Yes, but the only way you could know that is through evidence, which in this case doesn't exist. When Jonathan says that the Bible denies everyone's lived experience, he's saying that it denies that we can know things objectively from our own experience. And he's 100% correct. The real question is why Stephen keeps throwing the term around. After all, it's not just the Bible that throws out human objective experience. It's thoroughly established in philosophical circles as well. Although, if Stephen has a counter to Thomas Nagel's "What is it like to be a bat?" thesis, it's on how we could never understand being a bat unless you were, a bat. Well, if he's got it, I'd love to hear it. And so would this guy.
A leopard. On all levels except physical, I am a wolf.
I didn't put that in for comic effect, although it is funny. I put it in as a bookend to the guy we started with, the Roman Emperor Commodus. Remember why he was wearing that lion skin? Exact same thought process. And remember how I told you the biblical prophecy about the mark of the beast was a reference to the Roman Emperor Nero, and how one day the world would be full of people like that? Okay, now come back next week and I'll finish up my debate critique with a few odds and ends, and then show you the one prophecy that I've never heard any Christian apologist even mention, only recently fulfilled, that no one living in the 1st century AD could have possibly known. And it's not a veiled reference like 666. It's a direct statement. This is David Reich at From the Bunker. Click like and subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll try and keep the videos coming. Also, see the link below to order Book 1 of the Holocaust Engine series, our pandemic post-apocalyptic horror that won the Pinnacle Award for the best science fiction novel of 2020.